Hello, my name's Dr. Kate Vigurs, and I'm thrilled to have been invited by the Harrogate International Festivals to put together a lecture for you on my specialist subject, the Special Operations Executive French Section, or SOE F section. These were the secret agents, men and women, who trained to be infiltrated into enemy-occupied France to help prepare the resistance in preparation for D-Day. The 22nd of July this year marked the 80th anniversary of the founding of the SOE. So what better time to learn all about these courageous people? In the case of this lecture, the 39 women who were sent into France to work as couriers and wireless operators in preparation for the Allied invasion, D-Day itself. If you enjoy this lecture, perhaps you will look out on the bookshelves in March of next year for the book Mission France, written by myself and published by Yale University Press. I very much hope that you enjoy my lecture, and thank you very much for listening. For women agents. During the Second World War, 39 women were specially selected to work in a secretive, clandestine and mainly male domain, the Special Operations Executive French Section, SOE F. Ranging from housewives to grandmothers, shop assistants to princesses, these women were put through a rigorous training programme in which they learnt silent killing, instinctive shooting and sabotage, as well as survival tactics to prepare them for life as a secret agent. Some went by parachute, others by boat or aircraft to begin their dangerous work in enemy-occupied France, where, for most of them, work would involve being a wireless operator or courier. The latter often travelled hundreds of kilometres carrying vital yet incriminating information, whilst the former assisted in receiving arms and vital supplies, whilst undertaking huge risks to make contact with SOE headquarters over the radio waves. Behind enemy lines, they operated beyond the protection of the Geneva Convention, and at worst were given a life expectancy of 6 weeks. The need to use agents at all arose following the Nazi occupation of Europe and the desire of fallen nations to resist the new regime. This was especially prevalent in France, the government of which, on the 22nd of June 1940, had been forced to sign a humiliating armistice with Germany, in the same railway carriage where the 1918 armistice was signed, in which they agreed, amongst other things, to split France into 2 zones. Occupied France, which was put under direct German control, and unoccupied France, also known as Vichy, due to the location of the governmental seat. This was led by 84-year-old Marshal Pétain, a national hero of the Great War. The fall of France came as a huge blow to the Allies, and it led to the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill to write a letter to the Minister of Economic Warfare, Hugh Dalton, in which he said, "Now set Europe ablaze." This was to be achieved by a newly formed group called the Special Operations Executive, whose objective was to coordinate and assist local clandestine activity against the Axis powers and their occupying forces in territories across Europe and beyond. SOE would liaise with, equip, train and arm the local resistance, so when the time came, they could pave the way for the invading forces of D-Day and fight back against the occupiers. The SOE would also assist with sabotage and subversion on every level, from smaller acts of resistance, such as false intelligence and propaganda, to cutting power lines, derailing trains, and blowing up factories. They would do all of this in spite of the Nazi threat that any active or passive opposition to the German armed forces will incur the most severe of retaliatory measures. But just who were SOE? Well, they had 3 forebears. Firstly, Electra House, where it was initially based, set up in March of 1938 and run by Sir Campbell Stewart, which looked into methods of influencing German opinion. The second was Section D, founded in 1938. Its aim was to plan, prepare, and when necessary carry out sabotage and other clandestine operations, as opposed to the gathering of intelligence. Its leader, Laurence Grand, also had plans for targeting Germany's electricity, industry, phone communications, railways, food supplies, and agriculture, as well as writing a report on how to defend Britain against sabotage. The third organisation was the research section of the General Staff at the War Office, originally known as GSR and then MIR, who dealt with sabotage and subversion. It was set up in 1939 under Lieutenant Colonel Joe Holland RE. He brought in Jeffers, who was an explosives expert, to head up MIR-C, a division of MIR, that was to develop weapons for irregular warfare, such as the limpet mine, sticky bomb, and GT grenade. By July 1940, Section D and EH became a part of SOE and went on to form the core of the Political Warfare Executive in 1941, whose task was to spread false rumours and conduct psychological warfare. SOE also had similarities, and therefore conflicts of interest, with the Secret Intelligence Service, or SIS, also known as MI6 throughout the war. They'd been in existence since 1909 and by 1944 had 837 staff and a wealth of experience, having already functioned during the Great War. Nonetheless, SOE set up a huge number of different sections which worked in various countries, including, but not restricted to, Holland, Belgium, Norway, Yugoslavia, Greece, Italy, Albania and France. They also operated in the Far East in a branch known as Force 136, and France had 4 sections: EUP, which dealt with Polish settlements in Europe, DF, escape lines, RF and F. Now, F was the independent French section, who tried to work across the whole of France and ignore the tensions that were developing between the occupied and unoccupied zones, between Pétain and de Gaulle, the self-professed leader of the Free French in exile, and from whom F section was kept secret. When he did find out, he was exceedingly angry and set up his own section, RF. So there were intersection tensions between F and RF right the way through the war, each one believing that they were better than the other, that their men and methods were sound, whilst their rivals were not. Each thought the other was unfairly favoured, either by the rest of the SOE war machine or by politicians outside it. But in spite of these tensions, recruitment began and potential agents were interviewed. In total, F section employed more than 400 men and 39 women, who are the cast of this story. Employing women as secret agents for a formal organisation was a brand new concept. The idea had never even been mooted, let alone a reality before. It all started in April 1942, when the War Office made a groundbreaking decision, whereby it was agreed that women would be recruited by SOE for work in the field, providing assistance to local resistance networks in Nazi-occupied territory. The move was unprecedented. Up until this point, women's war work involved contributing to the war effort in a wide variety of ways, from munitions to driving, clerical work to nursing, most often on the home front, sometimes abroad, but never in the field of duty, and certainly none of them involving combative work or engagement with the enemy, albeit clandestine. The fact that official government permission was given to recruit and employ women to be trained to bear arms and to be infiltrated to work behind the lines as secret agents was extraordinary. MP Dame Irene Ward, who was present at the meeting, revealed later that the War Cabinet was not fully aware of what their decision involved. If they had been, permission would almost certainly have been refused. One concern that was raised was that giving women the right to bear arms meant they were not protected by the Geneva Convention, and therefore could not expect to be treated as prisoners of war if they were caught by the enemy. Also, they were not in uniform, and were therefore not officially affiliated to the British Armed Forces. In an effort to try to find a solution to these issues, most agents were given commissions in the First Aid Nursing Yeomanry, or FANY, while those who were recruited into SOE through the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, or WAF, maintained their rank or were promoted within that organisation. That said, the FANY were never officially part of the army, and so it did not do much to solve the issue. Irrespective of this, any of the women who were captured as resistors, saboteurs or spies would fall foul of Hitler's Nacht und Nebel directive, meaning night and fog. It was issued in December 1941 and said that efficient and enduring intimidation can only be achieved either by capital punishment or by measures by which the relatives of the criminal do not know the fate of the criminal. SOE was aware of the danger in which it was placing its agents, but it also knew how important and successful women agents could be if they just gave them the opportunity. One man who was very keen for women to swell the ranks of SOE was one of the recruiting officers, Major Selwyn Jepson. In face of much opposition, he tried to find an answer to the question of women bearing arms, and discovered that anti-aircraft units used ATS officers, and it was they who pulled the lanyard that released the trigger on the anti-aircraft guns. He said, There was a good deal of opposition from various quarters until it went up to Churchill, whom I had met before the war. He growled at me, "What are you doing?" I told him, and he said, "I see you are using women to do this." And I said, "Yes, don't you think it's a very sensible idea?" And he said, "Yes, good luck to you." And that was my authority. In saying that the ATS effectively used weapons, Jepson was hoping this might mean the women agents of SOE should also be allowed to train with and use them if necessary. The end result was that the women were allowed to be interviewed, and if suitable, trained to work as agents to go into enemy-occupied territory. Under normal circumstances, women who were selected to work for SOE after training were likely to be given one of two roles: the wireless operator or courier. Some, such as Virginia Hall, were employed in the early days of SOE to set up safe houses and work as initial points of contact for other agents. Likewise, Christina Scarbeck, Christine Granville, worked for Section D before she joined F Section. The work of the wireless operator required someone with mental stability and the ability to work alone. They should be known by as few members of the network as possible and would keep a very low profile. They would pick up messages from letterboxes or have them delivered by a courier. A wireless operator could change location as much as possible to avoid detection by Nazi direction finding vans or DFs. This was mobile equipment, and the maximum time for a live transmission, sending and receiving in code, should be no more than 20 minutes. Any longer than this and the wireless operator's location risked compromise that could result in capture. This was often problematic, as messages could become garbled, or they could have a disrupted signal caused by jamming or a noisy frequency. All messages were sent and received using unique codes that the wireless operator was required to memorize. Their work was fraught with danger, and if they were caught, an entire network could fall apart, as the operator was needed to ask for supplies, pass intelligence, or relay other important messages, such as arrest updates or requests for more agents. Wireless operators had the most dangerous job of all agents, as they risked detection whilst transmitting or capture whilst moving about the country with tangible evidence in their suitcases, their wireless sets. They also knew details about other members of the network and its activities that others did not. Training a wireless operator was time-consuming, and they were difficult to replace due to their specialised skills. Couriers required the ability to blend in and keep a low profile, as their job was to carry messages, reports, or any other material from place to place. Their normal mode of transport would be bicycle or train, and therefore they ran the risk of encountering spot checks and roadblocks. They would help other agents find safe houses and act as lookouts for wireless operators. Couriers would rendezvous with other agents and were therefore at risk of being drawn into traps set by the Nazis or collaborators. Couriers were also required to know as few people as possible, but in practice this was very difficult, because couriers were out in public and often on the move. They could cycle considerable distances in one day and did whatever was required of them by the network leader. Sometimes this would involve deputizing for them, assisting with arms drops and possibly sabotage. Although this was not strictly the role of the courier, it was sometimes the case that everybody was required to help. These couriers and wireless operators were to operate in France, which was unique in its comparatively widespread use of female agents, and there were several somewhat calculated reasons for this, such as the strategic importance of France in the bigger picture of the war. Of course, it was a planned site for the Allied invasion, and this had to be a factor. Also, the fact there was a reasonable amount of potential candidates, each possessing the required skills to be an F-section agent. Also, that the British government was keen to form a resistance that was not linked to de Gaulle and the Free French, so that they could govern it themselves. Jepson believed that women were very much better than men for the work. Women, as you must know, have a far greater capacity for cool and lonely courage than men. Men don't work alone. Their lives tend to be always in the company of other men. Also, in France, women were likely to attract less attention than men as they went about their day-to-day activities, such as cycling or shopping, which of course could be used as covers to allow rendezvous or to undertake clandestine work. Their cover stories were usually easier to validate too. This was because women were not required for compulsory labour under the Nazi regime, and they may have an occupation that could easily be accounted for, such as a district nurse or travelling sales assistant. Conversely, by February 1943, all able-bodied men over the age of 20 were required by law to work on behalf of the German war effort and the service to Travail Obligatoire, the STO. Those who refused were arrested, and those who shirked it fled to the countryside and mountains to join the maquis, which literally translates as scrub or bush, where they planned guerrilla attacks and formed pockets of resistance. So just who were these women? Where did they come from, and what experience did they bring? Well, the female agents came from many walks of life. Some were already working with the resistance and came to England for training, whilst others were fleeing from the Gestapo. Several of the women were already doing their bit in uniform, but were said to be bored or frustrated. They yearned for adventure and a chance to show their patriotism, which their recruitment into SOE would give them. Few who were mothers or housewives found themselves called to interview under various guises, such as to discuss war widows' pensions or photographs. Peggy Knight was overheard speaking French at a party, whilst Yvonne Roudelard and Blanche Charlet were enlisted through the Old Boys Network at the Ebury Court Club in London. A few of the women already had spouses or siblings in SOE, and they had been suggested to them to work for the organisation as suitable recruits. SOE recruited women of all ages and from all social backgrounds, from Polish countesses to working-class London girls. The youngest girl was just 19 years old, Sonia Butt, whilst one of the oldest, Yvonne Roudelard, was 45. SOE did not have a prescribed method for recruiting its female agents, nor did they set out to look for women of a certain class, age or nationality, and as such the female agents had different motives. Lillian Rolfe left her twin sister behind and travelled from Brazil on a ship full of expat volunteers to join up, first the WAF, then on to SOE, whereas Odette Sanson had already tried to undertake war work but hadn't found anything that really suited her. She sent some photographs of France to the wrong address and fell into SOE by mistake. Pearl Witherington had served with the air attaché in Paris since 1933 and was seeking adventure. New Zealand-born Nancy Wake had already worked with the resistance with her husband, who was caught just days after she fled and murdered by the Gestapo. SOE heard of her work, and her interviewing officer was said to admire her courage. Yvonne Roudelard was recommended for SOE work by Jacques Gillis, who was a member or a guest at the club where she worked. Noor Inayhat Khan's skill with a wireless brought her to SOE's attention via the WAF. Violette Szabo responded to a letter asking her to attend an interview about her war widow's pension as her husband had been killed in battle, and Virginia Hall was recruited for the American Embassy, to name but a few. Women were attracted to resistance work for many reasons: to fight the regime, to avenge a loved one's death or deportation, to protest against the forced labour laws, the STO, or to protect the future of their families. Perhaps the most apposite recruits for SOE were women who already had some experience of working with the resistance or on escape lines and who had lived in occupied France. Some women who resisted caught the attention of SOE agents already in the field and were recruited locally to work for the organisation. Once their potential was recognised, it was usually arranged they'd be sent to England for further training. There was no set of prerequisites or age limits, no particular experience or war service was required. SOE wanted a variety of women to work for them, and they certainly got a mixed bunch. The prerequisites for an SOE F section agent were standard, though, and they were of vital importance. Former SOE advisor Gervase Cowell stated, well, the first qualification was that they had to be able to pass as a native of the place they were in. So they had to be French or speak native French or, obviously, to look French. And it was as if they had to be able to have all the other necessary qualities for it. The candidate should also be sympathetic to the resistance and maquis. They should have physical courage and sufficient intelligence combined with just enough leadership to enable them to carry out one simple and specific job. So what was it that drove women who possessed these skills to become secret agents? Individual motives are curious things, and what leads one woman to join up to something may be the very thing that puts another woman off. Having children could be one such consideration, but motherhood could be the very motive for signing up. Jepson stated the agents had very different motives. There were those seeking escape or relief from domestic pressure, an unhappy marriage, loss of a loved one that might be assuaged by devotion to a cause, perhaps the loss of being through the war, simply to carry on where the dead had to stop. Above and beyond these personal motives, one has to remember the basic fact that of all stimuli, war is the strongest, enough to deny self in a common need to defeat the enemy. It was his job to establish during the interview, which was held at Orchard Court, a series of rooms off Portman Square near Baker Street in London, with a famous black marble bathroom, what a woman's motive was, and if she was suitable for recruitment into SOE. Jepson used the interviews to glean information, and only once he was convinced by a recruit's potential did he tell them what they might be in for. He explained the work, the dangers, and the chances of survival, and waited for the recruit's reaction. He was wary of over-enthusiasms or notions of romance or misguided passion. Some of the women he interviewed were shocked by his proposal, and others rushed at the opportunity, including Violette Szabo, who said without hesitation she would do it, and if she could take some Germans with her, so much the better. Her reaction took Jepson by surprise, and he sent her away to give himself time to think, as he did not wish to send out somebody made unstable by grief. In the end, he decided that she was suitable for training. Typically, the training consisted of a preliminary school, paramilitary school, parachute course, wireless course, and finishing school. The first part of the training was aimed at identifying unsuitable recruits and rejecting them as soon as possible. Here in England, to house these courses, SOE requisitioned several stately homes, including Wanborough Manor and Bewley House, Hampshire, earning the training schools the nickname Stately Homes of England. There was also an SOE training base at Massingham in Algiers. In the usual scheme of things, a preliminary course would typically last between 2 to 3 weeks and was held either at STS 5, previously known as Wanborough Manor, or STS 7, Winterfold House in Surrey, STS meaning Special Training School. Here recruits took tests to help determine their potential and to highlight their strengths and weaknesses. The course was held under commando cover, and locals were told this was what was going on, even some of the potential agents believing it too. But it must be pointed out that women were not recruited into the commandos, and therefore confusion could arise for them. Some recruits really didn't know what was going on. On the second day of their paramilitary course, Odette Weiland asked a fellow student, Pearl Witherington, "Just what is it that we're being trained for?" I answered an advert to be a bilingual secretary. She must have had a shock when she realised what she was there to do. Anne-Marie Walters said if anyone had told me that I would spend the summer of 1943 being timed on assault courses, tapping Morse messages on a dummy key, shooting at pieces of moving cardboard, crawling across the countryside and blowing up mock targets, I would have shrugged my shoulders in disbelief. Nancy Wake said there were trees to be climbed, gaps to be jumped, high slack ropes to be crossed with only another slack rope above to be used as a handhold, and a dizzying platform off which one must jump, catch onto a rope 6 feet away and slither down to safety. Clearly, the course was designed to test a recruit's courage, physical strength, and ability to think on their feet. Nancy was asked which she would like to attempt first, and her reply was, none of them. Apparently, this sort of training was not to everyone's taste, and in the opinion of some, Nancy included, was quite unnecessary. She had spent 2.5 years working in the resistance before she arrived in England, and had never been required to scale a 50-foot fireman's ladder. Team spirit and camaraderie were encouraged at Wanborough Manor. Lessons were all held in French, and recruits were known by code names and not permitted to speak about their outside lives. This helped to instill a security regime from the outset. Free time was closely monitored, and recruits were actively encouraged to drink, so that the instructors could see how good they were at keeping a secret. Would they talk if they were drunk? And if so, what would they say? And in what language? In the field, this would be the difference between life and death. Not all recruits were successful at the preliminary course. One such lady, Joyce Hannafay, was described by her instructors as being spoilt, affected, greedy for admiration, and vain and superficial. On top of this, she had not, until this point of the war anyway, February of 1944, shown any interest in war work, and she had never been to France. Her personnel file held at the National Archives was marked, not recommended. Successful recruits were now sent on their paramilitary course at one of 10 shooting lodges in Arisaig and the Morat areas of Inverness-shire, STS 21 to 26C. This course would last between 3 to 5 weeks, and they would learn physical training, silent killing, weapon training, demolition training, map reading and compass work, fieldcraft, appreciations, planning reports, orders, raid tactics, elementary morse, schemes and exercises designed to bring out the lessons taught in the foregoing subjects, paranaval training, and boat work. Whilst the content of this particular course may sound particularly military by 1940s standards, dare I even say masculine in its content, women had to get on with it too. Major Angus Fife, security liaison officer for the training schools in Scotland, said, "There was no distinction between the sexes, and all suffered the same rigours of physical training in the early hours of wintry mornings. The same mud, muck soakings in peat bogs on fieldcraft, the same sore muscles and aching joints from the Arisaig form of unarmed combat. After all, when they were crawling flat to the ground over the peaty marshes of Loch Naum, they were little more than bods in battle dress." Apologies for the pronunciation. Some aspects of training would be new to everyone, be they male or female, such as silent killing. This was an unarmed or knife technique, could also be done using rope, invented by Eric Fairbairn and William Sykes, two former Shanghai policemen, and was a combination of jiu-jitsu, judo, karate, kung fu, and taekwondo, which had been developed to deal with the criminal underworld of Shanghai, where drugs, murder, and gang warfare were prevalent in the 1930s. Silent killing was an aggressive form of unarmed combat, including the methods of self-defense against knife and other attacks, as well as the latest methods of attacking and killing sentries and other enemy troops quietly. It was added to the SOE syllabus in June 1942, when Fairbairn and Sykes were employed to instruct their own course. The training involved recruits practicing on straw dummies as well as on each other, with the aim of becoming attack-minded and dangerously so. The reality of actually kicking, punching, or choking someone proved to be shocking and unnerving for some of the female agents. Nancy Wake's instructors assured her that although she was physically not very strong, if she hit exactly the right spot, she could still be effective enough to kill someone. Something that Pearl Witherington agreed with, saying, "It is not a matter of how hard you hit them, but where you hit them." Nancy Wake admitted that silent killing taught you to kill someone in a cold-blooded fashion, using only your bare hands, but that she concentrated as hard as anyone on those lessons, against the day she might have to use it, and it transpires that she did, several times whilst in the field. As well as teaching the courses, Fairbairn and Sykes designed a knife for use in close combat by SOE agents and commandos. Known as the Commando Dagger, the knife had a double-edged blade with a 7.5-inch long blade. The hilt was 4.5 inches long and was inscribed with the initials of its inventors, F and S. For the SOE, the knife was intended to be concealed by the wearer, either in a trouser pocket or in the folds of a skirt. The knife was held in the flat of the hand and could be used in a swift stabbing motion or an upward thrust. A downward blow was considered to be less effective, and it could also be used for cutting. When learning how to use her F&S knife, Virginia Hall practiced with a dummy knife first, smeared with lipstick, so she could see how accurate she had been against a target. She became very adept at using a knife against a dummy, but the day they recruited to working on one another, the drill was to sneak up behind one of the other recruits and slit the throat. Virginia accomplished the task with no problem, but when the man turned round and Virginia saw the lipstick smear on his throat, reality sank in. That said, some of the recruits seemed to come into their own, and when training with the F&S dagger, Yvonne Roudelaar was said to be far more skillful at using a knife than most of the men. In addition to silent killing and knife training, an SOE recruit was taught how to use various British and foreign firearms. As with silent killing, the aim was that the use of firearms should become instinctive. Some women recruits were already accustomed to using firearms, and many excelled in their use. Violette Szabo, reputedly the best shot in SOE, something that was attributed to her spending time shooting at targets at fun fairs as a child and winning cigarettes for her brother. Virginia Hall was an experienced and accomplished hunter who was used to handling firearms. She was provided with a Browning repeater and told it was the lightest gun available at the time, and by the end of 3 weeks you'll be very comfortable with it. Nancy Wake also achieved a reputation for being a crack shot, because her shots never went too high, a problem often faced by users of the Sten gun. But other women struggled, as they were not used to handling weapons and they found them heavy. Yvonne Roudelard found the standard Colt pistol too heavy and was issued with a Colt 32 short-barrelled, weighing just 1¼ pounds. It was the lightest handgun available, but even then she found it remarkably heavy. Some agents just didn't like shooting at all. Noor Inayhat Khan's training report states that she was pretty scared of weapons, but tried hard to get over it. At the end of this firearms course, recruits would have trained with and become accustomed to using their own handgun. Recruits were also instructed in the use of plastic explosive and hand grenades. Although sabotage was not typically the work of women, many received training in it regardless. The demolitions courses lasted approximately 2 days. Each course was in 2 parts and lasted between 3 to 4 hours. Students were taught the different types of fuses that they could use and the different types of explosives. The main type of explosive used varied from 808, a volatile, rubbery, pale yellow substance that smelt strongly of almonds, to plastic explosive, PE2. This was much safer to handle, had no smell or taste, and could be moulded into varieties of shapes, such as cow dung, fruit, or even logs. Recruits at Arisaig were taught to blow up targets using these explosives, and the training was kept as realistic as possible, meaning that sometimes objects that were only meant for practice were actually destroyed, including the bridge at Loch Morar and the pier at Swordland. Explosive charges were made up beforehand, and Yvonne Roudelard made up her demonstration charges deftly and neatly, placing them well, as did all of SOE's feminine agents. May I draw your attention to the language used? Recruits were taught that the demolition must never fail, and they spent many hours of the day and night familiarising themselves with various gadgets, including incendiary devices, Molotov cocktails, and booby traps. Recruits needed to be at the height of physical fitness for the job that they were about to embark on, and so PT was an aspect of the course which recruits either loved or hated. Nancy fell into the latter category, playing on the fact that she was a woman to try to get away with avoiding the early morning runs. On one occasion she refused to get out of bed because she did not feel well. She was left alone, as such indispositions are inevitable with women. When, after 3 weeks, she was still avoiding the running, a doctor was sent to her, and she refused to be examined, saying that nothing was wrong. A miraculous recovery occurred on the day that the time of the run was changed from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. Other recruits raised to the challenge and enjoyed getting fit and healthy. The outdoor life suited Yvonne Roudelard, and years seemed to drop from her shoulders, whilst Noor was said to be in good physical condition with a renewed purpose in her life. Attendance at the next course was sometimes dependent on the recruits being in good physical condition. Parachute training was neither for the faint-hearted nor the physically unsound. On this course, which was held at Ringway Airfield, now Manchester International Airport, it was intended that all agents should complete 4 jumps, 3 from an aircraft and at least 1 from a stationary barrage balloon. It was essential in this case that men and women worked on equal terms. All had to complete the same course to attain their parachute wings and therefore complete training. Yvonne Bazin recalled that she found parachute jumping terrifying, but it was always terrifying, you know. You think, I've done it once and it will be fine. Mind you, I had 5 jumps as part of the training, and each was as unnatural as the first. Fortunately for Yvonne, she was not required to jump from the barrage balloon due to bad weather. Nancy did undertake the jump and was reputedly terrified, saying, "This is awful. I'll be killed, you know. I'll never do it again." Fortunately for Nancy, the weather was inclement for the remainder of her course, and she never had to jump from the balloon again. Some agents didn't do the course. Recruits could claim a fear of heights or were even deemed unsuitable, as was the case with Noor Inayhat Khan. Virginia Hall was exempt on account of the fact she had a false leg. That said, Andrzej Kowarski, who also had a prosthetic leg, became a parachute instructor. So maybe there were other reasons. And of course, there were the inevitable injuries. Odette Sanson smashed her face on the side of the hole as she jumped, and she sprained her ankle on a practice jump. She was signed off for several days and sent to an ophthalmic outpatient clinic, whilst Violette Szabo landed awkwardly on her ankle and had to spend several weeks convalescing, but on her return to the course was said to jump with verve and have good style. Many female agents did their required number of jumps and received their wings, but these were put away until the war was over, since nothing gives you away as being a parachutist quite so much as wearing your parachute wings in public. And what is a girl doing jumping out of an aircraft? At some stage during the core training courses, agents were separated into various groups, depending on what kind of work they would do in the field. Wireless operators were sent away on a course that would help to perfect their skills. This course was held at a number of places, including locations in the Midlands and Oxfordshire, and would take place either before or after the Scottish courses. Most agents had to start their wireless training from the very beginning, and they started by learning Morse code, gradually working their way up to speeds in excess of 22 words per minute, bearing in mind the average speed of a GPO telegraphist was 12 words per minute. In training, agents were expected to practice until they were perfect and to be perfect every time. Recruits learnt to incorporate predetermined security checks in their messages so that the listening post in England could establish whether the messages were genuine, being sent under duress or even being sent by the Nazis. Agents were made aware that once they were in the field, their messages would be sent to a particular receiving station in England, where hundreds of men and women, often Fanny, nicknamed godmothers, would constantly listen out to receive and reply to their wireless messages. They were often sent on clandestine exercises with their wireless sets. They would have to go to a specified location, find an area from which to transmit, and send prearranged messages to a home station. Often they would be sent to locations where trees, mountains, or tall buildings would impair their ability to transmit clearly. Occasionally, SOE trainers would trail them, and they would have to attempt to lose them. And sometimes the SOE would issue the local police with a description of the agents and told they should be brought in for questioning if they were seen. The aim of all this was twofold: to make the training as difficult as possible, so it would be a test of the recruits' resourcefulness and skill, but also to prepare them for life in the field as a wireless operator. On one of these, Noor was required to stay in a safe house, make a number of rendezvous, and partake in a police interrogation. The report states she made several stupid mistakes, and also volunteers too much information when being questioned. An example of this is when she was cycling towards her safe house to practice transmitting. A policeman stopped her and asked her what she was doing. "I'm training to be a secret agent," she said. "Here's my radio. Want me to show it to you?" The officer who conducted her interrogation said that if this girl is a secret agent, then I'm Winston Churchill. Noor was told she must learn to be more discreet. All recruits, whether wireless operator or courier, received their final training at Beaulieu. Here they were taught the elements of clandestine techniques and security, above all the importance of looking natural and ordinary whilst doing unnatural and extraordinary things. Beaulieu was the place where agents learned the reality of what it would be like to live in France and what being a secret agent really meant. This course was aimed at drilling the hard facts of life into the recruits. It also aimed to highlight the implications that simple mistakes could carry. It was on this course the agents were trained to think and behave as if they were actually French. Many changes had occurred in France during the occupation. For example, women were not given a cigarette ration, and coffee was only available without milk. Certain foods and alcohol were only available on certain days of the week, and agents had to be made aware of these changes, which would of course be second nature to a native French person. Otherwise, a small error could mark them out as being different and potentially cost them their lives. Recruits were taught about the two different zones and demarcation lines, the importance of false documents, papers and cover stories, how to recognise military uniforms ranging from the Abwehr, the Nazi military intelligence, and the Milice, Vichy paramilitary force, and the gendarmerie. During the Nazi occupation, France was teeming with collaborators, and agents were taught that no one could be trusted, in particular the police. Another vital part of training at Beaulieu was the art of clandestinity. Agents were taught various methods of contacting one another through letterboxes, cutouts, or dead drops. These were hidden places where messages could be left, such as in church Bibles, underneath a prearranged stone or in between bricks of a wall. It became second nature to them to use passwords when meeting with strangers, and if they believed that something was wrong at a rendezvous, they were to leave, as there could be a trap. They were taught to write messages on cigarette papers and onion skins, and the methods of passing these messages, including hollowed-out corks, inside cigarettes, or hidden inside newspapers. Beaulieu was also the place where agents would become at one with their cover story. They would learn every tiny detail of their character and would be questioned from time to time on elements of their new life. An element of training at Bewley which helped prepare the agent for life in France and its possible consequences was the infamous mock interrogation. I should state the cover story was not necessarily the one that they would be using whilst in France. Now, although the SOE syllabus said, if you were arrested by the Gestapo, do not assume that all is lost, the Gestapo's reputation has been built up on ruthlessness and terrorism, not intelligence. They will always pretend to know more than they do and may even make a good guess. But remember, it is nothing more than a guess. Otherwise, they would not be interrogating you. Agents were still dragged from their beds at any time of the night and were forced to withstand a Gestapo-style interrogation. The training staff would be in uniform, and the recruits would be questioned to ensure they knew the cover story and how to react to interrogation. Verbal and physical abuse were used to determine a recruit's ability to stand up to the rigours of Gestapo torture and their familiarity with their cover story. Sleep deprivation, bright lights, and harsh words made sure that the agent understood what interrogation meant. Now, despite all the strains and rigours of the final stages of SOE training, Bewley was a place in which calm and tranquillity could be found. Many agents said it was a piece of England that made them remember what they were fighting for. Agents found time for contemplation in the grounds of the old abbey, and a monument is placed there today to remember this as the SOE training school. Once agents had finished their training, it was the instructor's reports and a decision from Baker Street which decided whether they would continue for work in the field. The reports are a minefield for historians. For example, whilst Violette was said to be a very popular recruit, her motive was a cause for concern. And although she had a pleasant personality and was sociable, likeable, painstaking, anxious to please, keen and mature for her age in certain ways, in others she was said to be very childish. Her instructors concluded that the student is temperamentally unsuitable for this work. I consider that owing to her too fatalistic outlook in life, and particularly in her work, and the fact she lacks ruse, stability and finesse which is required, and that she's too easily influenced, when operating in the field, she might endanger the lives of others working with her. It is very regrettable to have come to such a decision with a student of this type, who during the whole course has set an example to the whole party by her cheerfulness and eagerness to please. The report was overruled, and Violette undertook 2 missions, the first of which started on the 6th of April 1944 with Major Staunton, for whom she was to act as courier. Violette's job was to follow the trails of arrested agents and resistance workers, visit those remaining, and gather what information she could. On one occasion, she was called in by the Gestapo for questioning, but was released within a few hours. Her first mission lasted 2 weeks. Violette was awarded her Fanny commission and requested to undertake a second mission along with Major Staunton and Bob Maloubier. The mission was to intensify resistance activity in the Haute-Vienne and to aid the Allies in D-Day. They arrived on the night of the 6th-7th of June 1944. 3 days later, on the 10th of June, Violette was sent to a rendezvous. En route, her car was intercepted by a detachment of the 2nd SS Das Reich Panzer Division. Violette was captured and subsequently held at Frayne prison. Eventually, she was deported to Ravensbrück, where she was murdered in January 1945. She was not alone in getting a poor report. Jacqueline Neame's training report, dated the 25th of August 1942, was not particularly positive. Her instructors had said that she was mentally slow and not very intelligent. Has a certain amount of intelligence, but is inclined to waver in the face of problems. A reserved personality and somewhat shy, little depth of character. In fact, she's a very simple person. Lacking in self-confidence, which might not be entirely due to inexperience, at present she could not be recommended. The report was very damning. It makes Jacqueline seem weak, characterless and flawed in nearly every respect. However, in pencil there is a note in the margin that refutes this, saying, "I think she's one of the best we have." Such disparity in her reports needed to be reconciled somehow, and hopefully Jacqueline would prove herself once in the field. A further report later stated she was a grand girl, full of common sense and charm. Her sense of security was unequalled by anyone else in the field. She did a tremendous amount of unspectacular, hard and uninteresting work, which she always discharged faultlessly. I think the world of her. Jacqueline was security conscious and excelled in her work, which included organising parachute drops. She remained in the field for 14 months until she returned home with exhaustion. Madeleine Damermont's report was much more straightforward, described as intelligent, practical, shrewd, quick and resourceful. She was deeply attached to her friends and should make a satisfactory subordinate under a strong leader, but would need careful handling. She had no chance to prove herself. She was dropped by parachute on the night of the 29th of February 1944, straight into the hands of the Gestapo, and was subsequently executed at Dachau in September 1944. Yolande Beekman was described as having a ready sense of humour without being witty, more common sense than intellect, more reliability than initiative. She shows any amount of determination in mastering the intricacies of the wireless and gives the impression that although she expects to learn slowly and with pains, it never occurs to her that she will not get there in the end. However, not everyone saw her ordinariness as an advantage, and one particular officer was extremely rude about her, saying she was a nice girl, darned the men's socks, would make an excellent wife to an unimaginative man, but no more than that. Her report also details her motives for joining the SOE, which were so elusive to her own family, and were idealism, the good of the cause, and devotion to duty. SOE considered she was not a sufficiently strong personality to be a leader, but would make an excellent subordinate or wireless operator. The man who had the final say over an agent's destiny was Colonel Maurice Buckmaster, head of SOE F section. He said that agents did not go unless they were completely satisfied that they were all right. According to Buckmaster, SOE did not make any serious mistakes with recruiting. We did nothing, he said, that led to tragedy. I think that in one or two people we were somewhat disappointed and had to, well, not cancel their job, but put them on to something else. We had to be very tough about it because other people's lives were at stake. That said, it was Buckmaster who allowed Noor Khan's final report to be overridden, and he sent her on her fatal mission. She was described as not overburdened with brains, but has worked hard and shown keenness, apart from some dislike of the security side of the course. She has an unstable and temperamental personality, and it is very doubtful whether she's really suited for work in the field. In the margins, Buckmaster has written, "We don't want them overburdened with brains. Nonsense, and it makes me cross." And on another report, he wrote, "Absolute balls." Buckmaster obviously disagreed with his instructors, but why? He'd not been present at her training, he'd not witnessed her mistakes and her average performances. Yet Buckmaster felt he had the right to override these statements. But why would he choose to send someone that so many people had said was unsuitable? The answer to me is clear. He knew from the moment she was accepted that Noor had the wireless skills and the knowledge of France, especially Paris, that he needed. The rest of her recruitment and training was routine. Buckmaster did not have any intention of turning Noor away. He used his authority to overrule the opinions of his staff and sent Noor to France regardless. There she worked as sole wireless operator after the fall of the Prosper network. She worked valiantly for several weeks before her own capture, which led to her own imprisonment at the Avenue Foch in Paris, from which she tried to escape. When she refused to sign an affidavit saying she would not try again, she was bound in chains and sent to Karlsruhe. Along with Yolande Beekman, Noor was executed at Dachau in September 1944, her final words being "Liberté." It will of course always be a cause of debate as to whether women should have gone and whether the report should have been adhered to. However, the training of female agents for SOE F section does, in my opinion, seem to have been a success. Although for some agents training was very much shorter than for others, all of them attended the basic training courses and as a result inevitably learnt skills that they would not have possessed before and that would equip them for work in the field. Their ability to shoot, operate wireless sets, use close combat and silent killing techniques may have come as a surprise to their instructors and even to the women themselves. Perhaps some women were sent who should not have gone. Perhaps the reports should have been taken more seriously. It would appear that when the need was highest, the standard was lowered, a case of human supply and demand. However, 39 women did pass their training courses and went on to become couriers and wireless operators working in occupied France, aiding the local resistance and helping preparations for the Allied invasion, D-Day.
Thanks for joining us. If you have enjoyed this event as part of the Harrogate International Festivals, please do think about a donation to ensure that our festivals can survive in the future. Donations can be made by texting HIF and the amount to 70085. For more events, please visit our online hub, the HIF Player. It's packed with upcoming live streams, events you've missed, archive recordings and much more.